For today's Halloween DIY, I wanted to do something that was quite simple but also didn't have the normal darker colours that you associate with Halloween. So what I've done is I've taken a candle jar, I've painted it white with chalk paint, and then I'm just going to be tracing the shape of a hip bone, a rib cage and then a skull at 3 different points around the candle jar. If you're not confident that you can do this freehand, one of the easiest ways to get around this is just to go on Google, find an image that you like, download it, print it out onto some piece of paper and then cut out the outline so that you can trace it and then use that as a guide to create the layered textures. To create the raised texture, I'm going to be using some gesso, and I used this maybe 3 years ago on the Please Don't Cry painting that I did. I loved it then and I've been wanting to use it again since then. But one of the things that you can do if you want to make the whole process faster, because otherwise you have to apply so many layers, is you could either mix it with plaster of Paris, you could mix it with flour, or you can mix it with wood glue, especially if you want it to really stick onto the surface. As it is, I know it's going to stick onto the surface and I wanted to just see how many layers I would need if it was just the gesso. As it is, it worked out at about 8 layers, so if you don't have time for that, feel free to mix plaster of Paris or flour into them just to thicken it up and speed up the whole process. Although it takes a bit of practice, one of the easiest ways to get those really fiddly thin areas that you want to layer is to try and load up the brush so that part of it is almost dripping off, not in a big blob, but almost like a small line that's just trailing off the end of the brush, and then use that to slowly drag it along and drag that gesso along to create that raised area. It is tricky to do, but if you have a longer brush that tends to flop a little bit, particularly the kind that you would normally use for a watercolour, that's going to be the easiest way to recreate that technique. 3 days later, once I finally had enough layers and I was happy with it, I decided to use a rusty brown ink. Now you could use something like acrylic, this is going to be a lot more water resistant, but because the gesso isn't really water resistant anyway, I decided I just wanted to use up an ink that I was trying to use up, and I'm going to add that in between the rib cage and basically around all the gaps that I've got for these bones. So for the rib cages, I'm going to be doing in between the ribs, and then around it I just want to do a thick line at first. Then you want to wet the brush and gradually blend out the edges, and if you need to do this in several layers and gradually build up the colour and the texture, go ahead and do that. As for the skeleton hands, that's easy. Do 2 lines. At the top of those 2 lines, do 2 little balls, and then you're going to do 4 little lines going up, a 5th one just sticking to the side, adding a small bone at the end. On the top of those 4 lines that you've done, add another 4 dots, and then after each dot you want to add 3 little bones, and that really is it. It is very, very simple to do, and you want to add this in between each of the bones on the top and the bottom. And that's it, you're done. If If you like my content and want to follow me on Patreon, that's where you can find my early content, extra content, and see the thought process behind things like my books, cover designs, videos, and artwork. You can also find me on Instagram, but the best place to follow me and make sure that all my new content is sent directly to you is through my website and the mailing list. On the top right hand corner, you put your name, the email you want your new content to be sent to, and that's it. You're done.